We are 150 participants all right now, coming from all over the world, and we are very happy to welcome you today. My name is Christoph Podewils. I'm Director of Communications at Agora Energiewende and master of this little ceremony. Next to me is sitting Patrick Graichen, the Director of Agora Energiewende. Before I hand over to him, I would like to make some organizational remarks. You will find all information in this webinar, also in our brand new publication Understanding the Energiewende, which we will publish right after the webinar on our website. If you are a subscriber to our newsletter, you will be informed automatically. If you are not a subscriber yet, we invite you to subscribe via our website www.agora-energiewende.de. By the way, the German Ministry of Economics and Energy publish a monthly newsletter on the Energiewende too. You can subscribe via bmwi.de/en. To let you know, we will record this webinar and publish it online on our website by the end of the week. Your names or questions and remarks will not appear anywhere. During the presentation, I will disappear from your screen, but you can ask questions all the time via the message tool, which I will activate now. Well, it should be activated now. I ask Nicola to do that, please, for me. Or So that's our first technical problem. I hope it's also our last one. If you have technical problems too, you can ask them, or you can let us know via the messaging tool, and my colleague Nicola will take care of them. If your questions are Energiewende related, I will collect them during this presentation, and in the Q&A session afterwards I will ask them to Patrick. Unfortunately, the webinar tool seems to be a little bit old-fashioned in some details, so I would like to ask you to state your name and affiliation when writing to us. So stating your name and affiliation will make things a lot easier for us. By the way, your messages remain private. The other participants will not see them. And last not least, in the bottom corner on the left hand of your screen, you have the possibility to express your emotions via a couple of emoticons. For instance, clapping hands to signal applause. So, and now I will hand over to Patrick. Patrick, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello everybody. I hope this works out fine, and let me jump right into the issue. So, the presentation should be going on. Wie komme ich jetzt, wie klicke ich weiter? Wie klicke ich weiter? Da hat nichts passiert. Ja. Okay. Who are we, the Energiewende, Agora? We are a think tank based in Berlin with 20 experts working on the energy transition in Germany. And we're funded by two foundations with only one task, and that is very fortunate. The question is, how do we make the energy transition a success story? We work through different means. We have studies that we publish, which you can find on our website. We do stakeholder dialogues, and we have a council where there are members from all over the stakeholder groups in Germany that are involved in the energy transition. So it's from utilities to environmental NGOs, unions, grid operators, and of course also the state ministries, both from the Länder and from the federal government. So we'll be focusing with this webinar on the energy transition in the power sector. And what is it basically in a nutshell? Well, it is about transforming the power system fundamentally. And here you can see basically our power mix as it was in 1990. Hardly any in renewables, about 25% nuclear, and the same with hard coal and lignite. Today we ramped up to something like 27% renewables, a lot less nuclear, but still a large reliance on coal and lignite. And by 2050 it should be at least 80% renewables. Now that is the government goals as in the energy concept of 2010 decided, and it is straightforward to arrive there, because if we take climate change serious, then by the year 2050 greenhouse gas emissions in Germany need to be down by 80 to 95%. That's a goal that the European Union has given itself for all its member states. And in the power sector, virtually there are three options. That is nuclear, that is CCS, and that's renewables. And out of these three, we have taken nuclear out of our options because nuclear is considered in Germany to be a risky technology, and that will be a phase out by 2022. And since CCS is nowhere near, well, it eventually means building a power system based on renewables. And since that is a lot cheaper, the less power you consume, energy efficiency is the second pillar. Now, let me give you an indication of what that means. So far we had, like a lot of countries, very centralized power systems. Around 200 to 300 big power plants, coal, gas, nuclear, delivered their electricity to the grid and through the grid to the consumers. And the new world will be totally different. We'll have lots of solar, lots of wind, producing also at the low voltage near the consumers, and then we need to come up with a system that is able to have all those different actors, all those decentralized power production work together and combine it with the central elements that are still needed. So where do we stand today, and what are the challenges that we face? In the year 2015, as we stand today, we have around 26% renewables in our mix, with wind being the largest share, followed by biomass and solar PV, and nuclear is now at 16%, with still strong coal, that is 45% hard coal and lignite taken together, and you can see how that evolved over those past 25 years. Now, I know that there has been a lot of talk about the German nuclear phase-out, and something like a hasty Merkel decision in 2011 after Fukushima. In essence, that's not the case, because here you see the nuclear power production since 1970, and you see that it basically, after 1990, nothing much changed. And we had a long nuclear discussion that started basically in the 70s, and it resulted in a nuclear phase-out law that was already in our written in our books in the year 2002. And it was then withdrawn in the year 2010, and after Fukushima reinstated. But you can see that the nuclear power production was already in decline between 2002 and 2010 because of that first nuclear phase-out law. So in a way, I think the difference between the second nuclear phase-out law that we now have and the first one of the year 2002 is that now that debate is virtually over. There is no political party anymore that is arguing for a prolongment of lifetime of nuclear power in Germany. The second, where do we stand in terms of climate? We have minus 26% greenhouse gases in 2014 compared to 1990. There is a domestic target of minus 40% by 2020, and in the energy concept there are also intermediate targets already depicted for 2030, 2040 and the 2050 goal. So you can see that there has been quite a substantial decline so far, most of it being the first 5 years, which was the shutdown of industry and energy utilities in the eastern part of Germany. But also since 1995 we had quite a decline. The question, how do we reach those further goals, is then part of the whole energy transition story I'm about to tell. Where do we stand in terms of renewables? We have 26% in terms of power production, which is 27% of power consumption, because we produce more than we consume. The target currently set in the law is 40 to 45% renewables share by 2025, and up to 60% within the next 20 years. And we're quite on track to meet those targets. I guess for 2015 we'll have something between 29 and 30% share of renewables. And when it comes to energy efficiency, the interesting development is that energy consumption is now considerably lower than 1990. With terms of power consumption, it is higher than 1990, but it is lower than the maximum we've seen in 2007, which is a trend you also see in the rest of Europe. So despite economic growth, there has been a decrease in power and energy consumption, which is a good sign in the sense that energy efficiency is actually taking place. Now, I've been saying already that we produce more than we consume, and indeed last year we had an export record of 36 terawatt hours, which is about 6% of our power production. There has been a lot of talk that after the nuclear phase-out decision we would be an importing country. That's not the case. We have lots of trades with our neighbors, so there's a lot of export and imports going on. But the net balance is that we export more electricity to our neighbors than we import. What about household power prices? They have gone up considerably since 2000. This is here showing it since 2007. And a large part of that was the increase of the renewable surcharge. I'll come to why that has been the case later. But so far we've seen that has now stabilized in the past 3 years. So at least no further increases are facing to our consumers. But nevertheless, we have the second highest household prices in Europe, just after Denmark. So that's definitely one also element that we will have to tackle when we go further down the energy transition. Now, is this something that has been done against public will? No, on the contrary. If you ask German citizens on the energy transition, you always get 90% yes, we want that to be done. But you get also only half of German citizens saying that it's done well currently. So there is a management discussion, basically. Are we on track when it comes to the energy transition measurements? Are we on track when it comes to building those renewables, the power lines? But there's no political power party or any broad support for halting that trend. Now, the key insight that we got when we further went into the issue and asked ourselves, what does it mean to build a renewable-based power system, is that it's all about wind and solar. Now, why is that the case? For two reasons. We have had enormous technological progress when it comes to wind and solar. Remember those little windmills that were built in the 1990s, and now it's standard to build 3 megawatt windmills. When it goes to wind offshore, there are 6 to 10 megawatts already. So that has now become a mature industry worldwide. The cost regressions that we've seen with solar just in the past 10 years, they've just been tremendously. So minus 80% cost when it comes to solar PV in the past 10 years. And we've done a study with Fraunhofer on do we expect further cost regressions to be seen, and they said yes. Just within the next 10 years we expect another 20 to 30% decrease from where we are now, and by 2050 there are lots of low cost options out there for solar. But even now we have now cheap solar and wind available, which you can see when you compare it to other new options. Now, building a new hard coal power plant in Europe or a new gas power plant in Europe, you'll also have something like 7-8 cents per kilowatt hours as your average cost, which is what you pay for wind and solar in the German feed-in tariff system as well. And when you compare it to other low carbon options, like new nuclear or new hard coal, CCS, then wind and solar are a lot cheaper. So in essence what we're saying is yes, going down that renewable route is something that one has to do in order to have a low carbon energy system built up, but no, it's not an expensive task anymore. Of course, new wind and new solar are more expensive than existing coal, existing gas. So what we're doing here is comparing it with new power plants, and I think the main issue that we have to solve is what about new entrants, new wind and solar entering a game where there's a lot of existing high carbon capacity. Now, of course, wind and solar aren't there 24/7. There is no sun at night, obviously, and there are also lots of times when there's little or very low wind. So what about integration cost? Now, those extra costs that exist for having a stable electricity power system, even with wind and solar, and we're about to publish a paper on that issue. And the key insight is here, yes, there are additional costs to be tackled, but they don't change the picture. So it's another 5 to 20 euros per megawatt hours that you have to add on top of your wind and solar cost, but that doesn't make them tremendously expensive. The interesting thing is also that it varies a lot on your power system, so those integration costs differ across regions depending on how your existing power stock is and how flexible basically you can integrate them into your existing power plants. Now, because of those key insights, this is what the German Grid Agency is projecting as the increase in power production from renewables within the next 20 years, and that's what they are planning the new grid for. So this is basically the expectation of our domestic grid agency. A lot of wind onshore and offshore to be entering the system. Me personally, I would think they're underestimating solar here. So with solar costs having going down so quickly, I would expect the increase here to be a lot faster, and then maybe a little less wind, but that's more or less what we'll be expecting as power production development in Germany. What does it mean building a system on wind and solar? Well, it does change a lot, if not everything, because wind and solar have specific characteristics that are different to others, and that is they are producing power whenever the weather is right and not whenever someone pushes a button, and they have very high capital cost and very low variable cost. So that is different to a coal and gas power plant, where about 50% of the costs are burning costs, fuel costs, CO2 certificates maybe, and they're not depending on the sunshine or wind. And what you then get is a power system that needs to cope with very different situations. Now, this is here a study we did looking forward into the year 2023. And what we did here is basically assuming that those renewable power plants that the grid agency is projecting in their network plan had already been there in the year 2011. So we took the weather data of 2011, we took the load data of 2011, and assumed that all those windmills and solar power plants of the year 2023 would have already been in place. What would power production have looked like in that year? And then you get 52 graphs like these. Essentially, they give you from Monday to Sunday a red line, that's power demand, and then in green, blue and yellow the power production by renewables. And what you see is here in that February week how a wind area went once through Germany. Monday we had virtually no wind, and then it came from the North Sea going all over to Germany, and then on the weekend we suddenly had about 100% of our demand being matched by those windmills that are all in place into the 2023. You have an August week when there's a lot more sun, obviously, but then also some wind coming through. But then you always also have that November week where there is little sun and all over Western Europe no wind. And what you need now to build up a system is that some power system that is able to cope with all those three situations. And essentially it means that the gray area, which is what the fossil power plants will need to be delivering in the year 2023, is well delivered by the remaining coal and gas-fired power station. And this is now basically showing that gray area for a sample week in the summer. And essentially what you see when you look at that gray area on the right-hand side, it shows two features. One, it ramps quickly up and down, so you need fossil fuel power plants that are able to ramp up and produce power quickly and then reduce their power production also quickly according to the weather. And you need power plants that are able to produce nothing, so they have a low must-run power production level. Like that Sunday at noon, you won't want any renewable, fossil power plants to produce, but then on Sunday night up to some 30 gigawatts again. So it is about flexibility, and that is then the key paradigm of a wind and solar based power system. Flexibility means you need fossil power plants that are able to ramp up and down quickly and go down to zero. But it also means transporting electricity. We can sell it to our neighbors. We can trade with the neighbors back and forth depending on whether they have good or bad weather conditions. We can also shift demand, so that red load curve here could adapt itself also to those hours where there is more wind and sun. And there's the option to have storage. Now I'm saying that as the fourth element because storage is, at least now, still an expensive flexibility option, and I'm just saying we shouldn't wait for storage to come in order to move into that wind and solar based world, because there are lots of other flexibility options as well, and they're cheap, they're available, so there's no need to wait for storage to become cheap. But Having said that, I do expect batteries to be a cheap technology very time soon. Now, one last thing on this, it also means that baseload capacities aren't needed anymore. We don't need power plants that run 24/7 like the old lignite and the old nuclear power plants are used to. In essence, that would lead to excess electricity in all those times when there is a lot of wind and a lot of sun. We rather want flexible fossil fuel power plants than baseload ones. Now, what are the key challenges ahead? And we're now moving into that second step of the energy transition. Having entered now the world of nearly 30%, we now need to go into a 50% world. First challenge is that we need new grids. We'll have lots of new solar being built in the south, and we have a lot of new wind being built in the north. Now, we could obviously have more wind being built in the south, but still most of our wind power will probably be coming from the coast, either onshore or offshore, and we need to transport it to the southern part of Germany, where there are lots of load hotspots in Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg, where there's a lot of industry demand. And of course there's a lot of discussions, especially by those that live near those power lines that are planned. By next year there will be a new grid power plan to be adopted by Parliament, and in essence we'll probably have a lot more being built as cables, so underground, than traditionally overground net, just to increase acceptance. The second challenge is climate. I've been showing that graph before on the overall greenhouse gas emissions. This is now the greenhouse gas emissions only of the power sector. And you see here that the power sector didn't really reduce its greenhouse gas emissions since the year 2000. There was an up and down, but it didn't change much. And there is a reason to that, and that is coal. We have a lot of lignite and hard coal in our system, and in order to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in the power system, we need not only to ramp up renewables, but we also need to reduce coal. And therefore we are calling for a coal consensus, in the sense that we need extra instruments to phase out coal, because the European emissions trading system unfortunately is not delivering. Third challenge is energy efficiency. As I've been saying, we had the peak in energy in power demand in the year 2007, and it's already now down by some 5%. But we want to have even more reduction by 2020. Also because we expect further power demands to coming from electrifying the heat sector or electrifying the transport sector. So in order to have an efficient system, we need to have traditional power demand go down. Next challenge is the power market design. The German wholesale power prices are down, a lot of reduction since only the past 3 years, and they're so down because of mainly 3 effects. You can buy electricity in Germany for now around 30 euros per megawatt hour at the wholesale power market, because the CO2 price in the EU emissions trading system is very low, because coal is very cheaply available on the global markets, and because renewables entered the system, and renewables basically pushed out expensive power plants out of the system. So there's basically no gas power plant working anymore in Germany, but it's renewables that pushed out, and it's only coal power plant that sets the price. And because coal and CO2 is so cheap, we do have a cheap power price. Now, essentially, a new power market design is then needed, and it means that we'll have probably four elements that drive the market. One is the power market on the wholesale power bourse, where you can trade electricity currently on an hourly base, but also intraday on a quarterly hour base, and that will be the key place to trade electricity very short term. Balancing markets should adapt also to become more flexible, so that's where you trade power. There are two extra elements that are needed, and that is some instrument on resource adequacy and some instruments on financing renewables. Why is that the case? Well, when it comes to renewables, if we had an EU emissions trading system with high prices, 50 euros, 60, 70 euros, then we would probably not need a renewable instrument. But as it stands now, with 7 euros per ton of CO2, that's just not an option. So we'll need a market-based instrument to finance renewables, and we're moving into the auction world when it comes to large wind and solar power plants. And second, how do we have security of supply guaranteed? Well, you cannot be really sure that the power market, the short-term power market, will always deliver security of supply. That's why a lot of countries are going into a capacity market. We in Germany are not going into that direction, but rather having a capacity reserve, which will be outside of the power market, but then jumping in if there is not enough capacity on the power market, and that will then have high costs for those that were not able to ask for enough power in ahead. So it is trying to get the incentive to build new power plants within the power market. And the fifth challenge, I would say, is European cooperation. So within Europe, there are lots of different instruments on resource adequacy, capacity mechanisms. There are a lot of different instruments on renewables. So what we need to come to grips within Europe is to better integrate ourselves, because we have a joint challenge. And that's what I'm going to turn to now at the end of this talk. I'm saying, no, Germany is not a special case. If you take the EU 2030 targets seriously, we have minus 40% greenhouse gas emission reductions in Europe as a European target. We have a 27% renewables target. Well, if you do your maths and if you put on all those models that are out there, it implies a 50% renewable share in the European power sector. And because wind and solar are the cheapest technologies, not only in Germany but also in other countries, it'll mean a lot more wind and solar also elsewhere. What we did here is a little study for Central Western Europe, so Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, France, Austria, Switzerland. And what we did is we took their projected renewable scenarios as of the European Grid Agency plan, and what we found is working together on that Central Western European platform, integrating the markets will make it a lot easier for all of us. You can see, for example, that Austria and Switzerland have a lot of storage capacities, and trade back and forth between Germany, France, Benelux and them will help that flexibility challenge to be met for all of us cheaper. And when you look at the world, well, you see that wind and solar have been the booming technologies also in terms of global capacities. In the year 2013, for the first time, more renewables were installed than coal, gas and nuclear taken together in terms of gigawatt installed. We expect that that trend is something that is stable and is not something for Germany. Why? Because there's wind all over the world. Germany has about average wind capacity, I would say, and there's a lot more sun. almost everywhere in the world than there is in Germany. So this was my quick go through the German energy transition as it stands. You can find more information on our website here at agora-energiewende.org, which is the English website. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for this presentation. And also, participants, thank you very much for all your questions. We got really a lot, and I will try to bundle them a little bit. The first questions were about carbon and carbon pricing. How relevant is carbon prices is, for instance, asking Mark Johnson, how could Germany help to make carbon prices better? And related to that, another question also from Mark Johnson, how to deal with the EU compatibility of lignite-only capacity payments, which are being discussed in Germany currently, and the possibility that those payments are not legal according to European law. Patrick.
Yes, I'll switch to some backup slides in terms to climate. Now, this is basically this price that we have seen for this EU emissions trading market on the right-hand side. So so far we are at around 7 euros per ton of CO2, and I think everyone agrees that that's not a signal to decarbonize the European power sector. And why are we in that situation? Well, because we have excess certificates in the EU trading scheme of more than 2 billion ton of CO2, and the problem is they will stay. Now, having said, the European legislature have agreed to a market stability reserve, and that is only starting in 2019. And then slowly building up to get those excess certificates out of the system. What we did here is a projection of will those excess certificates basically evolve. And you see that by the year 2023 there is still 1 billion excess certificates, even though the market stability reserve will have then almost 3 billion certificates. Which leads to me being skeptical that the EU CO2 price will actually be somewhere in the region of 30 euros per ton of CO2, which we will need before, I'd say, the end of the next decade. And that essentially means that we need additional measures. I note that the UK has its CO2 extra price as of this April. We were having a discussion on that, we now agreed to have a 2.7 gigawatt reserve of old lignite power plants. Whether or not that is something the European Commission will allow or not is under discussion. Me personally, I would think yes, that is compatible if the conditions are set right to European competition law. But in essence, I'd say they're all crooks, because we need something that really drives decarbonization in the power sector, and the EU emissions trading scheme will need extra measures on top. Whether or not it's that lignite reserve, or whether it'll be additional instruments otherwise, like a targeted CO2 price or some agreed phase-out of old power plants, is something to discussion, but we can't just let it go.
Thank you. Then we have a couple of people who would like to know what the difference is between capacity market and capacity reserve mechanisms. Please, could you explain that?
Yes. Maybe just going back to that slide. The there are basically different possibilities to solve the power market. If you do a capacity reserve, what you do is you contract some capacities as the government, but they're outside of the power market, so they're not on a daily basis on the power market, and they only jump in those situations where there is shortage, which means that the price in those hours will be very high. When there is shortage on the power market, you should see prices of 10,000 euros per megawatt hour suddenly occurring. And those hours of 10,000 euro per megawatt hour would be then the hours where a new power plant built into the market would really make its money. If you do it the other way around, like the UK or France is now doing it, then you give basically all capacity that is on the market a capacity payment, and they then have a contract with the government that they are always there when needed, which means that you will not have those high power prices like 10,000 euro per megawatt hour in times of shortage, but you have a constant payment for that capacity service. In essence, there are two different ways of financing basically capacity. One is basically believing that shortage prices in the market will actually deliver, but having a safety margin in case that the market for some reason or another doesn't. And the second is having contracts with the government to ensure. There are valid arguments for both ways. And there's risks with both ways, obviously. One is regulation failure. Are you contracting maybe the wrong capacities if you have a capacity market? Are you contracting too much? And the other is market failure. If you just believe in the power market, well, there are options that the market fails. We've seen that in financial markets as well. So that's in essence the discussion that is taking place in Europe between different countries.
Before I come to our next question, I would like to make an organizational remark. You will find the presentation further on our website, and also on the link of that spread webinar. So just click the link of this webinar and you will get to this presentation again. But now let me come to the next question, or basically a bundle of questions regarding biomass. There were two questions. The one was, why is not more biomass included in those scenarios? And the second question is a biomass which is included in the scenario basically is cogeneration biomass or other kinds of biomass.
Yes, thank you for that question. Why not more shares of biomass? Well, if you try to model a system with 80 or more % renewables, you find out that there is not enough land available globally to have high shares of biomass in global power systems. Small countries may go ahead for a few years, but when you really think about decarbonizing global power systems, then you need to have technologies that don't need a lot of land. And in essence, that's why you end up with wind and solar. The second reason is wind and solar are cheaper than burning biogas. So when focusing on an efficient and cheap renewable power system, then you also end up with wind and solar as being the main pillars. We in Germany have quite high shares of biomass already, so it's around 8% of biomass in our system, and If you take the different scenarios that are out there, they all say something like 10% is basically what the equilibrium value of biomass in a high renewables world will be, because there will be some biomass also needed for biofuel, because we don't have other solutions so far for airplanes. So in essence, the reason is straightforward. Wind and solar are cheaper, and there's not that much land to have high shares of biomass in Germany, and I would say that's also the case for most countries out there.
Thank you. Next questions are on the integration. And Adrian Kamp and Isabella Vasco from Brazil is asking on the potential of better regional cooperation or integration. So what can that deliver for the Energiewende?
Integration with the neighboring countries is the cheapest form of flexibility. So what you see, especially already today for small countries like Denmark, which has high shares of wind, a lot higher than we have already, and they are organizing a lot of their flexibility by trading it back and forth to other countries in Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, and to Germany. And we experience now the same. When we have a lot of wind, then there's a low power price on our wholesale markets, and then that's the time when the Netherlands, when France, when Austria buys electricity from us. Once they have higher shares of renewables, we would want to buy it from them when they have a lot of wind, because the more regional you get, the more you can profit from different weather patterns. So there's not always the same amount of wind all over Europe, but it's different from North Sea to Baltic Sea and to the Mediterranean. And the more regional integration we have, the more we can all profit from trading it back and forth depending on where actually the wind is in that situation.
Thank you. Then we have a couple of questions on energy storage. So what about cost of future energy storage, and which technologies could be feasible for the Energiewende?
Yes, thank you. A very good question. Now, what we experience so far is that batteries are getting a lot cheaper. So I would expect solar combined with batteries will be a technology where we see the breakthrough within the next years. Already now, of home solar systems, a quarter is now, and actually the 2015 data is now being sold together with a battery system. And when we will actually see electric vehicles come online, I would expect that those electric vehicles will also serve as a battery for the power system. And therefore I would expect battery to be the technology that will come online when it comes to storage within the next 10 years quite considerably. What that actually delivers is flexibility from day to night and throughout basically a 24-hour cyclus. So that's basically what they can do. When you look at a situation where we are, where we are here in November, and that November week here, obviously the batteries won't help, because there is no electricity from Tuesday noon to be shifted to Tuesday night. And that's where you need long-term storage. That's when power to gas may enter the game. So far, power to gas is a very expensive technology, and I would consider that we only need it for that last step. So when we start to have 70% renewables and want to jump to 100% renewables, that's when we really need power to gas. Beforehand, I don't expect it to be really a key technology.
Thank you. Next question is from Lars Jensen of Extron. He asks less gross electricity in 2050, so that's one of the first slides. Less gross electricity in 2050 than in 1990. How realistic is that?
Yes, I don't consider that to be really realistic. I would see that we need to basically have it minus 25% power of traditional power uses. So that we have less power from our current power uses, but then more power demands coming from electric vehicles and more power demand coming from having heat pumps and trying to decarbonize the heat sector, because I think decarbonizing the heat sector will essentially mean more electric heating. And given those two trends that are then opposite, I would expect 2050 power demand to be probably some thing like 700 terawatt hours or something. So a bit higher than today, but not going into a real high power demand world, because there is efficiency that we can still tap in traditional uses.
And another question regarding data. How transparent are which sources are we using? I think especially in our 2022 scenarios. That's a question from Robin Beer of Aachen University.
Well, the data that we are using here is mostly given by the grid agency. It is data that we are using from officially available power market data. The transparency platform of the power exchange in Germany has delivered quite some data that we can use. So I think the old days, where especially in Germany you had the problem that the utilities didn't want to deliver data, are over, because a lot of transparency issues have been taken up, and so E has a transparency platform for all over Europe, which delivers quite some transparent data on power production from the different sources and the different countries, and the grid operators are also having lots of transparency on their websites. The key issue is to gather it from those different websites and to basically bring it together. We try to do that service, so go and have a look at our website. There are lots of data and tools, and the daily power production that we put there on our website gives you a feeling of what one can already do today with the data.
Thank you. Then we have some questions on demand response. So how big is the potential of demand response as a means of flexibility, and what is currently being done to improve demand response in Germany?
Yes, thank you. Very good question. Demand response is one of the keys to flexibilizing the power system. So I would consider it very important. And we did a study on trying to have demand response estimated. So how much is there in Germany to be tapped? Um, and we could see that in Germany already now you can have some 4 gigawatts in industry and another for flexibilizing heat systems. So something like 6-7 gigawatts is out there to be tapped. Currently, there's very little of that used because I would say the institutions aren't already there. We have grid fees that are not in line with demand-side management, so sometimes you pay more grid fee if you go into demand-side management. So what we need to come at grips here is that we change our regulation system to really integrate demand-side management. And if you look into the long run, then demand-side management will have a lot more potential. There is, for example, power to heat, so more power to be consumed in the electricity sector and more in the heating sector, and that can be then shifted to the night, to the day, whenever it's really best for the power system. So I would expect for the future that demand-side management becomes one of the key issues of a flexible power system.
Thank you. Then we have a couple of questions regarding the Energiewende and our eastern neighbors. So what do we make with their complaints regarding the grid congestion, the low flows, and the decline of coal power, which could be forced by German Energiewende in the eastern country, in our eastern neighboring countries? Sorry.
Well, when it comes to loop flows, there is obviously an issue, and that's why we have the grid power plant to build those new power lines. There are already now new power plants that are being built. The most important one is the one from Thüringen to Bavaria, and that will probably be coming online in 2017. So most of the loop flows that we currently see should be over by 2017, because then we have the phase shifter between Eastern Germany and Poland being installed, and we have the Thüringer Strombrücke, which delivers electricity from Thüringen to Bavaria. Having said that, we'll still need to build more lines, but also within Poland and Czech Republic they need to be building more lines, because there the grid isn't as strong as it should be in the same needs as we see it in Germany. When it comes to coal, well, yes, the issue is of course cross-cutting. So what we see here in terms of coal power production is mirrored in Poland, is mirrored in the Czech Republic. We're of course discussing it with our partners in the East as well. I think that in essence it is about asking whether or not new investment in those power plants should be taking place. I would consider that given the cost of building a new coal-fired power plants versus new wind and new solar, one can discuss that very rationally without having highly ideological questions. And then it's basically about the question: how do we have the transformation of the system so that it is socially acceptable for those regions that really depend on coal. And I would think that that is the key question we have to solve within Germany, because parts of eastern Germany depend on lignite, and the question is how do we solve that issue. And the same discussion is now taking place, I think, in Poland when it comes to coal mines, which are also all heavily under threat. And then we would need to find that discussion taking place also when it comes to coal-fired power production.
Thank you. So it's 12 o'clock. I would like to come to our last question for today. It's from Roberta from Brazil, and she's asking, what can Germany recommend as a rich country to developing countries? So what can other countries learn from the German experience?
Yes, thank you. Well, I think the good news for you is that wind and solar have been expensive, and we have had quite some cost problem with taking a lot of solar in our system at the times when it was expensive, but now they're cheap. So a new solar power plant in Brazil should be producing even cheaper electricity than in Germany, because you guys have a lot more sun than we do. Now, what does one need to solve in that context? Maybe two things. One, take care about the grid issues. When you build solar PV within the cities, it is a bit more expensive, but you don't have to adapt anything on your grid, as long as you can build it on houses, and then you probably don't have to change anything big for the grid. But if you build it somewhere outside of the cities, then you may need extra grid. And the question is always, how do you integrate them into the grid, and how do you have the grid operator to be a partner of integrating it into the grid, and not to have the grid operator as someone who is opposing those new technologies, which is what we see in some countries, where the grid operator is also the one operating coal-fired power plants, and they don't want to see those extra new electricity, because it's a threat to the existing way of making money. So that is something to take into consideration. How is the grid issue to be solved? And the second thing I would like to address is financing conditions. We have cheap wind and solar prices because we have a reliable financing framework for renewables. Once you win an auction, then you have a 20 years guaranteed income stream, and they trust that we don't change that retroactively as the German regulator. Other countries like Spain have done retroactive cutting of those contracts, which now means that investors put very high risk premiums in those markets. They don't believe anymore, which makes it all more expensive. So have a reliable framework where trust and no retroactive actions are the basis. Will make it a lot cheaper than when investors need to fear that things will come up differently throughout the years, and then suddenly they have to face huge cost. So I'd like to draw your attention to that publication, Current and Future Costs of Photovoltaics, where we also discuss those cost issues when it comes to financing conditions. So that is very important. And last but not least, before we end the session, may I also give you a hint that our newsletter, which you can subscribe on our website here, will give you a lot of information whenever we have a new publication coming up. So please use that option.
So thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you very much, participants. you have attended a long session and almost everybody stayed tuned. Thank you very much for that. We will publish this presentation and this webinar on our website, and I also would like to invite you to subscribe to our newsletter. You will got all the information once we publish new publications or a webinar, and of course also the big publication joined to this webinar, Understanding the Energiewende Today. And I have to say sorry, we got about 50 questions from you. That's way too much to answer them all in half an hour or so. We will check them afterwards and will come back to you bilateral if necessary. So thank you very much again and have a nice day.
Goodbye, everyone.